After 43 years of scraping by as a school cafeteria worker, living paycheck to paycheck in my tiny apartment, I thought my golden years would be spent counting pennies and clipping coupons. Then came that miraculous Tuesday when my lottery numbers finally hit. $87 million that I kept completely secret. But when my son Marcus told me I was too old and embarrassing to attend his wedding, dismissing me like some decrepit burden, he had no idea that the poor old woman he was ashamed of could now afford to buy the entire country club where he desperately wanted his reception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Beatrice Holloway, and at 68, I've learned that life has a twisted sense of humor. For most of my adult life, I was exactly what my son's future in-laws would later call me, a simple woman from humble beginnings. I worked in the cafeteria at Maplewood Elementary School for over 4 decades, serving sloppy joes and chocolate milk to thousands of children, including my own son Marcus during his grade school years. Those were different times. Marcus used to beam with pride when his friends saw me behind the lunch counter, always making sure to wave and call out, "Hi, Mom!" as he went through the line. I'd slip him an extra cookie or a larger portion of his favorite mac and cheese, and he'd grin, like I'd given him the world. Back then, he wasn't ashamed of his mother who wore a hairnet and orthopedic shoes, who smelled like industrial-strength disinfectant and cafeteria food. Life wasn't easy after Marcus's father, Robert, died in a construction accident when Marcus was only 12. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and I was left to raise a grieving boy on a cafeteria worker's salary. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside Gardens, the kind of place where the heat barely worked in winter and the air conditioning was nothing more than a dream. Marcus wore hand-me-downs from the church clothing drive, and our idea of a family vacation was a day trip to the free zoo in Millfield County. But I was determined to give my son every opportunity I could afford. I worked double shifts when they were available, picking up catering gigs on weekends, anything to put a few extra dollars aside for Marcus's future. When he showed interest in playing soccer, I found a way to scrape together the registration fees. When he needed a computer for school projects, I took on a 3rd job cleaning offices at night, coming home exhausted but knowing it was worth it when I saw his face light up. Marcus was a bright boy, always had been. His teachers consistently praised his intelligence and drive, and I harbored secret dreams that he might be the first person in our family to attend college. Those dreams felt impossible when I looked at our bank account, but I never let Marcus know about my financial fears. As far as he was concerned, we were rich in the ways that mattered: love, determination, and hope for the future. The scholarship letter arrived during Marcus's senior year of high school, a full ride to Westchester University for business. Administration. I cried tears of joy in that tiny kitchen, clutching the letter to my chest while Marcus whooped and danced around our cramped living room. It was validation that all those years of sacrifice, all those double shifts and sleepless nights worrying about bills, had been worth it. College changed Marcus in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each semester break, he seemed a little more distant, a little more aware of the differences between his humble background and the affluent world he was entering. He started making comments about our neighborhood, about the apartment, about my job. Nothing cruel, just observations that stung nonetheless. "Mom, you should really think about moving somewhere nicer," he'd say, or, "Maybe it's time to consider a different career path." After graduation, Marcus landed a position at Pinnacle Financial Group in downtown Crestwood, starting as a junior analyst with a salary that seemed astronomical to me, but was apparently entry-level in his new world. He moved into a sleek apartment in the trendy Harbor District, began wearing expensive suits, and started dating women whose handbags cost more than my monthly rent. I was proud of his success, genuinely thrilled that the sacrifice had paid off. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming an embarrassment to him. Our weekly dinners grew less frequent, then shifted to monthly lunch meetings at chain restaurants in neutral locations where he was unlikely to encounter colleagues. When I'd suggest visiting his new apartment, there was always some excuse. He was redecorating, his roommate was having issues, the building was doing maintenance. The lottery ticket was an impulse purchase on a particularly difficult Tuesday in March. I'd been battling the industrial dishwasher all morning. My arthritis was flaring up, and Mrs. Patterson had complained again about the temperature of the soup. On my way home, I stopped at Murphy's Corner Store, the same place I'd been shopping for 20 years, and decided to spend $5 on lottery tickets instead of my usual pack of discount coffee. Old Murphy himself sold me the tickets, chatting about his grandson's baseball season while the machine printed out my random numbers. I tucked them into my purse without looking, forgot about them entirely until the following Saturday, when I was cleaning out my wallet and found them crumpled between old receipts. The winning numbers had been announced 3 days earlier. I checked my ticket against the newspaper listing once, then twice, then a third time with a magnifying glass to make sure I wasn't imagining things. All 6 numbers matched perfectly. $87 million. After taxes, still more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But here's the thing about suddenly acquiring vast wealth. It doesn't automatically change who you are inside. I was still Beatrice Holloway, cafeteria worker, Marcus's mother, woman who clipped coupons and checked sale prices. The money felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. I continued working for 2 months while the Lottery Commission processed my claim, telling no one, not even Marcus, about the windfall that would change everything. The check arrived on a Friday. That weekend, I quietly resigned from my position at Maplewood Elementary, citing health concerns and early retirement. My supervisor was surprised but understanding. After 4 decades of service, I'd certainly earned the right to rest. Little did she know that rest was the last thing on my mind. I had plans for this money, dreams I'd never dared voice. I wanted to travel, to see the places I'd only read about in library books. I wanted to take cooking classes, learn to paint, maybe even go back to school myself. I wanted to set up college funds for future grandchildren, donate to causes I cared about, live with dignity and purpose. But most of all, I wanted to share this miracle with my son. I imagined his face when I told him about the lottery win, how proud he'd be, how we could finally enjoy experiences together without worrying about money. I pictured us taking a vacation together, maybe to Europe, staying in nice hotels and eating at restaurants where I wouldn't have to check the prices on the menu. What I didn't anticipate was the phone call that would shatter those dreams before I'd even had the chance to share them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus called on a Wednesday evening in late October, just as I was settling into my new evening routine. Since winning the lottery 6 months earlier, I'd developed small luxuries: premium tea instead of instant coffee, a subscription to several magazines I'd always wanted to read, and the simple pleasure of not checking my bank balance with anxiety every few days. "Mom, I have some exciting news," Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular tone of forced enthusiasm I'd grown to recognize. "Sophia and I are engaged. Sophia Caldwell. I'd met her exactly twice, once at a stiff dinner at an upscale restaurant where she'd spent most of the evening checking her phone, and another time at Marcus's company holiday party where she'd introduced me to her friends as Marcus's mother, who works in food service. Both encounters had left me feeling like an unwelcome intrusion into their sophisticated world. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, pushing aside my reservations. "When are you thinking of having the wedding? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We're planning something quite elaborate. Sophia's family has connections at the Grandview Country Club, you know, the one overlooking Lake Serenity. We're hoping to book their main ballroom. for next spring. I knew the Grandview by reputation only. It was the kind of establishment where memberships cost more than most people's annual salaries, where old money families had been hosting their events for generations. The waiting list for wedding bookings supposedly stretched years into the future. That sounds lovely, I said carefully. I'm sure it will be beautiful. Well, here's the thing, Mom. Marcus's voice took on that tone again, the one that suggested he was about to deliver news wrapped in careful diplomacy. Sophia's family is handling most of the arrangements. Her mother, Patricia, has very specific ideas about the guest list and the overall atmosphere they want to create. A cold feeling began forming in my stomach. What kind of specific ideas? Marcus cleared his throat. It's going to be quite a formal affair. Black tie, very elegant. The kind of event where every detail matters for their social circle and, well, for my career prospects too. Sophia's father sits on several corporate boards, and there will be a lot of influential people there. I see, I said, though I was beginning to see more than I wanted to. The thing is, Mom, Patricia is concerned about the guest demographics. She wants to ensure that everyone at the wedding fits a certain profile: successful professionals, established families, people who move in their social circles. The careful language wasn't fooling anyone. I'd heard these euphemisms before, in different contexts, but with the same underlying meaning. And you're telling me this because? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. Because I think it might be better if you didn't attend the actual ceremony and reception. The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my teacup with trembling hands, the delicate china rattling against the saucer. You don't want me at your wedding. That's not what I'm saying, Marcus protested quickly. Of course I want you there in spirit. It's just that this particular event is more of a business networking opportunity than a family celebration. We're thinking we could have a separate, smaller celebration afterward. Just the three of us. Something more casual where you'd be more comfortable. More comfortable. As if my discomfort was the issue, rather than their embarrassment at my presence. Marcus, I said slowly, are you telling me that your future wife's family doesn't think I'm good enough to attend your wedding? Mom, please don't take it that way. It's not about good enough. It's about fitting in with a specific crowd. These people have expectations about social backgrounds, education levels, professional status. They don't understand working class values the way I do. The patronizing tone was almost worse than the outright rejection. He was speaking to me like I was a child who needed complex social dynamics explained in simple terms. I raised you better than this, I said quietly. You raised me to be practical, Marcus countered, to understand that sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the sake of our future. This wedding isn't just about Sophia and me. It's about the life we're building together. The career opportunities, the social connections that will benefit our future family. And I'm an obstacle to that future. Marcus sighed heavily. You're not an obstacle. You're just different from their world. You worked in a cafeteria, Mom. Sophia's friends are lawyers and doctors and investment bankers. Her mother chairs charity committees and sits on museum boards. It's not that there's anything wrong with your background. It's just that mixing these social circles could be awkward for everyone involved. I thought about the lottery ticket tucked away in my safe deposit box, about the investment portfolios I'd been quietly building, about the financial advisor who'd been helping me plan charitable donations that would dwarf Patricia Caldwell's committee contributions. The irony was so profound it was almost amusing. What about your father's side of the family? I asked. Robert's brother Thomas. Your cousin David? Are they invited? Another pause. Uncle Thomas lives in Oregon now, and David's going through that messy divorce. It just seemed easier to keep the guest list focused on Sophia's family and my professional colleagues, so it wasn't just me being excluded. It was anyone who might remind the assembled crowd that Marcus came from humble beginnings, that his path to success hadn't been paved with family connections and inherited wealth. Have you told them about your father? I asked. About how he died working construction to support his family? About how you got to college on a scholarship because you couldn't afford tuition? Mom, what's the point of dwelling on the past? I've worked hard to build something better. Isn't that what you wanted for me? Yes, I had wanted him to build something better, but I'd never imagined that better would mean discarding the people who had helped him get there. When is the wedding? I asked. May 15th, at the Grandview Country Club. The ceremony is at 4, reception immediately following. I made a mental note of the date and location. And you're certain this is what you want? To exclude your mother from one of the most important days of your life? I'm certain that I want to start my marriage with the best possible foundation, Marcus replied. And sometimes that means making practical decisions rather than emotional ones. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, staring at the wall where I'd hung a photograph of Marcus receiving his college diploma. In the picture, he had his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride and joy. That young man seemed like a stranger now, replaced by someone who spoke in corporate buzzwords and viewed relationships as strategic alliances. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Jennifer Walsh, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd been helping me navigate my sudden wealth with discretion and wisdom. Mrs. Holloway, she greeted me warmly. How are you settling into retirement? I'm well, thank you. I have a question about real estate investments. Specifically, I'm interested in learning about country club properties. Are they ever available for purchase? Jennifer's interest was immediately piqued. Country clubs can be excellent investments, though they require significant capital and ongoing operational expertise. Did you have a particular property in mind? The Grandview Country Club in Serenity Heights. I'd like to know if it's for sale or if the owners might be interested in selling. That's quite a prestigious property, Jennifer said with obvious surprise. May I ask what sparked your interest? Let's call it a family investment, I replied. Something that might benefit my son's future. What Marcus didn't know, what none of the Caldwells knew, was that Beatrice Holloway was no longer just a retired cafeteria worker. I was a woman with resources, connections, and a growing understanding of how money could open doors that had previously been firmly closed. If my son wanted to play in the world of wealth and influence, perhaps it was time for him to learn that his embarrassing old mother had been invited to that game as well. Jennifer Walsh proved to be more resourceful than I'd anticipated. Within 48 hours of our conversation, she'd uncovered information that would have taken me months to discover on my own. The Grandview Country Club, despite its prestigious reputation and seemingly unshakable position in Serenity Heights society, was facing significant financial difficulties. The club has been struggling for the past 3 years, Jennifer explained, during our meeting at her downtown office. Membership has declined as younger wealthy families prefer more modern facilities, and the maintenance costs for a property that size are astronomical. The board has been quietly exploring options, including a potential sale to a hospitality management company. She slid a thick folder across her mahogany desk. The current owners are asking for $42 million, but based on the financial statements I've reviewed, I believe they'd accept $35 million from the right buyer, someone who could demonstrate both the capital and the commitment to maintaining the club's reputation. $35 million. 6 months ago, that number would have been incomprehensible to me, an amount so large it might as well have been play money from a board game. Now, it represented less than half of my lottery winnings, a significant but manageable investment that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of my relationship with Marcus and his new social circle. What would ownership entail? I asked. Studying the architectural photos of the sprawling clubhouse and championship golf course. You'd have complete control over operations, membership policies, event bookings, staffing decisions, everything. The club currently employs about 80 people full-time, from groundskeepers to waitstaff to golf professionals. There's also a waiting list of over 300 families hoping for membership, which suggests strong demand despite the financial troubles. I thought about Marcus's dismissive comments about my working-class background, about Patricia Caldwell's concerns regarding guest demographics and social circles. The irony was delicious. The very establishment they viewed as the pinnacle of social acceptability could soon be under the control of the cafeteria worker they were so eager to exclude. "I'm interested," I told Jennifer, "but I want the purchase handled with complete discretion. Can it be structured so that my ownership isn't immediately apparent?" Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "Certainly. We could establish a holding company, perhaps with you listed as a silent partner or even completely behind corporate entities. May I ask why the secrecy is important?" "Let's just say I'm planning a surprise for my family." Over the following weeks, Jennifer worked with a team of lawyers and accountants to structure the purchase. We created Serenity Holdings LLC, with me as the sole beneficial owner, but operating through a complex web of corporate entities that would make my involvement nearly impossible to trace without significant investigation. The financial records would show only that a well-capitalized investment group had acquired the property with plans for tasteful modernization and continued high-end operations. The negotiations took nearly 2 months. The Grandview's board of directors was initially skeptical of our offer, concerned that new ownership might fundamentally alter the club's character and exclusivity. Jennifer handled these concerns masterfully, presenting a business plan that emphasized preservation of traditions while introducing subtle improvements to ensure long-term financial stability. During this period, I made several reconnaissance visits to the club, posing as a potential member interested in joining. The membership coordinator, a polished woman named Evelyn Masters, gave me tours of the facilities while subtly assessing my suitability for their exclusive community. "The Grandview has maintained its reputation for over 70 years, she explained, as we walked through the elegant dining room with its crystal chandeliers and panoramic lake views. Our members represent the finest families in the region: business leaders, philanthropists, professionals who value tradition and discretion." I nodded appreciatively, playing the role of an impressed prospective member while mentally cataloging every detail of the property that would soon be mine. The ballroom where Marcus and Sophia planned to hold their reception was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake and a capacity for 300 guests. The golf course was immaculately maintained, the tennis courts were recently resurfaced, and the spa facilities rivaled those of luxury resorts. "What's the typical waiting period for membership?" I asked during one visit. Evelyn's smile was apologetic, but firm. "Currently, we're looking at approximately 18 to 24 months for full membership, depending on the applicant's background and references. The committee is quite selective about maintaining our community standards." Community standards. The phrase followed me home, echoing in my mind as I imagined Marcus's reaction when he learned that his embarrassing mother now controlled access to those very standards he was so eager to embrace. The purchase was finalized on a crisp December morning. I sat in Jennifer's conference room, signing document after document that transferred ownership of one of the region's most prestigious properties to my newly created corporate entity. The sellers seemed relieved to close the deal, their financial pressures finally resolved by the influx of capital from my lottery winnings. "Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway," Jennifer said as we shook hands. "You're now the owner of the Grandview Country Club." The words still felt surreal. 3 months earlier, I'd been unknown to these people, invisible in their social stratosphere. Now I controlled the very institution they used to define their place in society's hierarchy. My first decision as owner was to retain most of the existing staff and management, including Evelyn Masters. These people understood the club's operations and culture far better than I did, and their expertise would be invaluable as I learned to navigate this new world. I did, however, request detailed reports on upcoming events, membership applications, and any special requests for facility usage. The Christmas party booking list made for interesting reading. Marcus and Sophia had indeed reserved the main ballroom. For May 15th, their deposit paid through Sophia's father's corporate account. The event was listed as Caldwell Holloway Wedding Reception, with an expected guest count of 250. I studied the catering requirements, the floral arrangements, the specific requests for photography lighting, and musical entertainment. Everything had been planned with meticulous attention to detail, designed to create the perfect backdrop for Marcus's entry into high society. No expense had been spared. This was clearly intended to be a statement event, the kind of celebration that would cement relationships and open doors for years to come. Reading through the correspondence between Sophia's mother and the previous event coordinator, I began to understand the level of importance the Caldwell family placed on this wedding. It wasn't just a celebration of love between two young people. It was a carefully orchestrated networking opportunity, a chance to showcase their family's influence and Marcus's value as a rising star in the financial world. The guest list, when it finally arrived for my review, read like a who's who of regional power brokers. Bank presidents, law firm partners, real estate developers, tech company executives, and their families. These were the people Marcus had prioritized over his own mother, the connections he'd deemed more valuable than the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. As the new year arrived, I began implementing subtle changes at the Grandview. Nothing dramatic enough to alarm the membership, but small improvements that reflected my growing understanding of hospitality and service. I upgraded the staff uniforms, improved the quality of linens in the dining areas, and authorized a refresh of the landscaping around the main entrance. I also made it a point to visit the club regularly, often dining alone in the restaurant or enjoying afternoon tea in the garden room. The staff began to recognize me as a frequent guest, though none suspected I was actually their new employer. Other members would nod politely when we passed in the hallways, making the sort of superficial small talk that seemed to pass for conversation in their world. During one of these visits, I overheard Patricia Caldwell discussing wedding preparations with a group of friends in the ladies' lounge. She was clearly in her element, describing the elaborate plans with obvious pride and satisfaction. "The flowers alone are costing $12,000, she bragged to her companions. But Robert insists that Sophia deserves nothing but the best for her special day. And of course, Marcus is such a catch, brilliant, ambitious, from good solid. Working-class stock, but with the intelligence to appreciate finer things. Good, solid, working-class stock." The phrase stung, reducing my son's entire upbringing to a quaint backstory that added character to his appeal without actually requiring any ongoing connection to his origins. "What about his family?" one of her friends asked. "Will they be involved in the festivities?" Patricia's pause was telling. Marcus's father passed away years ago, and his mother is, well, she's a simple woman. Sweet enough, but not really equipped for this level of social complexity. We've decided it would be kinder to everyone involved to keep the celebration focused on our immediate circles. Kinder to everyone involved. As if excluding me was an act of mercy rather than snobbery. As I sat in that beautifully appointed lounge, listening to Patricia Caldwell dismiss me as socially inadequate while planning her daughter's wedding at my country club, I realized that my revenge would be sweeter than I'd originally imagined. These people had built their entire sense of superiority on foundations that were far more fragile than they understood. Soon, very soon, they would learn that the simple cafeteria worker they'd deemed unworthy of their company now held the power to grant or deny their most cherished social aspirations. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it an increasing frequency of phone calls from Marcus about wedding preparations. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield, with him sharing details about the elaborate celebration while carefully avoiding any mention of my continued exclusion from the guest list. "Sophia's dress fitting went perfectly," he told me during one of our increasingly strained weekly calls. "The designer flew in from New York just to handle the alterations. And the cake tasting at Laurent's Patisserie was incredible. We ended up choosing a 7-tier creation with handcrafted sugar flowers. I listened to these updates with a mixture of maternal pride and growing resentment. My son was describing what should have been one of the happiest times in his life, but he was sharing it with me like a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who'd raised him. "That sounds lovely," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm sure everything will be beautiful." "Actually, Mom, there's something I wanted to discuss with you." Marcus's tone shifted, taking on that careful quality I'd learned to dread. "Sophia and I have been talking, and we think it might be nice to plan that separate celebration we mentioned. You know, something just for the three of us after the honeymoon. The consolation prize. The informal gathering designed to salve his conscience while keeping me safely away from his important day. "Where are you thinking of going for your honeymoon?" I asked, deflecting the conversation away from the painful topic of my exclusion. "Actually, that's part of what makes this so exciting. Sophia's father has arranged for us to use his friend's villa in Tuscany for 2 weeks. It's apparently been in the same family for generations, a working vineyard with the most incredible views of the countryside." Of course it was. Another connection. Another demonstration of the Caldwell family's ability to provide experiences that my working-class background never could have offered. "I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it despite my hurt. "You deserve to see the world." "Thanks, Mom. I know this whole situation has been difficult, but I hope you understand that I'm trying to build something here. Sophia's family connections could really help my career, and this wedding is important for establishing our place in certain social circles." There it was again. The language of transaction and networking, as if marriage was primarily a business merger rather than a union of hearts. After hanging up, I drove to the Grandview Country Club, my country club, for what had become my daily reconnaissance mission. The wedding was now just 6 weeks away, and the activity level at the venue had intensified dramatically. Event coordinators were meeting with vendors, tasting menus were being finalized, and floral arrangements were being planned with military precision. I'd taken to having lunch in the club's restaurant most afternoons, positioning myself strategically to observe the preparation process while maintaining my cover as a regular member. The staff had grown accustomed to my presence, greeting me warmly and ensuring my favorite table by the window was always available. On this particular Tuesday, I overheard a conversation between the head of catering and someone I recognized as Sophia's wedding planner, a sharp-eyed woman named Celeste Morrison who specialized in high-end society events. "The Caldwell family wants to make absolutely certain that every detail reflects their standards," Celeste was saying as she reviewed a thick folder of notes. Mrs. Caldwell was very specific about the guest flow, the photography timeline, and the overall atmosphere they want to create. "Of course," replied the catering manager. "We've handled many prominent weddings, and we understand the importance of discretion and excellence." "Good, because this event is particularly significant for the groom's career prospects. He's being considered for a promotion at Pinnacle Financial, and several of the partners will be attending. The impression made here could influence his professional trajectory for years to come." So that was it. The wedding wasn't just about social climbing, it was about Marcus's career advancement. The exclusion of his mother wasn't merely snobbery. It was strategic positioning designed to maximize his professional opportunities. As I sat there, stirring sugar into my coffee and pretending to read a magazine, I felt something harden inside my chest. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about my son making calculated decisions to erase his own history, to deny the woman who'd made his success possible in favor of people who saw him as a useful acquisition. That evening, I called Jennifer Walsh to discuss expanding my involvement with the club's operations. "I'd like to take a more active role in major event planning," I told her, "particularly for high-profile weddings and corporate functions." "That's certainly within your purview as owner," Jennifer replied. "Did you have specific changes in mind?" Want to personally approve all events with guest lists exceeding 100 people, and I'd like to institute a new policy requiring character references for event hosts, ensuring that our venue is only associated with individuals who demonstrate genuine class and integrity. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. That's quite a departure from the club's traditional hands-off approach. Are you certain you want to be so directly involved? Absolutely. The Grandview's reputation is my responsibility now, and I intend to ensure that only the most worthy celebrations take place on our grounds. The following week, I arranged a meeting with the club's event coordinator under the pretense of planning a potential charity fundraiser. During our discussion, I made it clear that I expected to be consulted on all major upcoming events, including the Caldwell-Holloway wedding scheduled for May. Of course, Mrs. Holloway, the coordinator assured me. Though I should mention that event is already fully contracted and in the final planning stages. Any significant changes at this point might be challenging. I understand completely, I replied with a smile. I'm not interested in making changes. I simply want to ensure that everything proceeds flawlessly for such an important family celebration. Meanwhile, Marcus's calls became increasingly effusive about the wedding preparations, as if his enthusiasm could somehow compensate for my continued exclusion from the actual event. You should see the ballroom decorations, Sophia. As planned, he told me during one conversation. She's bringing in these massive floral arrangements, peonies and roses in soft pink and cream, and they're installing special lighting to create this romantic ambiance during the reception. It sounds like she has excellent taste, I replied, thinking about how I could have afforded to fly in the world's most renowned florists if anyone had bothered to include me in the planning. She really does. And Mom, I know I haven't said this enough, but I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you did to get me to this point. The sacrifices you made, the way you supported my education, none of this would be possible without you. The gratitude felt hollow when accompanied by continued exclusion, like a consolation prize designed to make him feel better about his choices, rather than actually honoring my contributions to his success. I'm proud of the man you've become, I said, though I was beginning to question whether that was entirely true. As April progressed, I began making more frequent appearances at the club, familiarizing myself with every aspect of the property that would soon host my son's wedding. I walked the grounds where cocktails would be served, examined the ballroom where dinner would be celebrated, and studied the terrace where photographs would be taken. Each visit reinforced my understanding of how carefully orchestrated this event would be, how every detail had been planned to create the perfect impression for Marcus's professional and social advancement. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of celebration that a successful lottery winner could have provided for her son, if anyone had bothered to discover what she was truly capable of offering. The final piece of my reconnaissance came when I encountered Sophia herself at the club, meeting with the florist to finalize the centerpiece designs. She was exactly as I remembered, polished, confident, and completely absorbed in creating the perfect aesthetic for her perfect wedding. The roses need to be absolutely pristine, she was instructing the florist. No wilted petals, no brown edges. And the height of the arrangements is crucial. Tall enough to create drama, but low enough that guests can converse across the tables. Standing nearby, pretending to admire the lake view through the ballroom windows, I listened to my future daughter-in-law orchestrate what should have been our family's celebration. In 6 weeks, this room would be filled with people who considered me unworthy of attendance, celebrating the success of a young man whose achievements had been built on my sacrifices. But they were celebrating in my ballroom, at my country club, under arrangements I had the power to alter with a single phone call. The time for passive observation was drawing to a close. Soon, it would be time for the Caldwell family to learn that their carefully planned social triumph was taking place at the pleasure of the very woman they'd deemed too embarrassing to invite. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April, delivered by courier in an elegant cream envelope bearing the Grandview Country Club's embossed seal. For a moment, my heart leaped with the impossible hope that Marcus had reconsidered, that somehow my exclusion from his wedding had been a terrible misunderstanding. But as I opened the heavy cardstock invitation, I realized it wasn't for the wedding at all. Patricia Caldwell was hosting a pre-wedding brunch for intimate family and close friends, a gathering of 30 select individuals who would have the privilege of celebrating with the happy couple before their big day. The date was set for the Sunday before the wedding, and the location was, naturally, the Grandview Country Club. I was not invited to this event either. The exclusion stung even more deeply than my absence from the wedding guest list. This wasn't about managing a large social gathering or maintaining professional appearances. This was an intimate celebration of family, and apparently, I didn't qualify for even this smaller circle of acceptance. I called Marcus immediately, my hands trembling as I dialed his number. "Mom, hi," he answered, his voice carrying a note of wariness that had become all too familiar. "I received an invitation to Patricia's pre-wedding brunch," I said without preamble. There was a long pause. "Oh, I didn't realize she was sending those out today." "Marcus, I wasn't invited." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, that brunch is really more for the immediate wedding party and their families. It's going to be quite small, very focused, on the people who are directly involved in the ceremony." "I'm your mother," I said quietly. "How much more directly involved could I be?" "You know what I mean. The people who are standing up in the wedding, their parents, a few very close friends. It's not about excluding you specifically. It's about keeping the group manageable." The careful language was becoming a familiar pattern, but this time I could hear the strain in his voice, as if even he was struggling to believe his own justifications. "Who's attending?" I asked. Marcus sighed heavily. "Sophia's parents, obviously. Her sister and brother-in-law who are in the wedding party. The maid of honor and best man with their spouses. Sophia's grandmother, who's flying in from Charleston. Maybe 20 people total. And none of my family." "Mom, what family?" "It's just you. And like I explained, this is really more of a wedding party event." "Just me." The phrase echoed in my mind, reducing my entire existence to a single, inconvenient person who didn't fit their careful social calculations. "What about your cousin David? Or Uncle Thomas?" "David is still dealing with his divorce, and Uncle Thomas can't travel right now because of his wife's health issues." "Look, Mom, I know this is hard, but we're trying to keep things simple and focused." Simple and focused. Translation, embarrassment-free. After ending the call, I sat in my living room for nearly an hour, staring at the elegant invitation that had made my exclusion so painfully official. The brunch would be held in the club's garden room, an intimate space overlooking the rose gardens where I'd spent countless afternoons over the past few months, planning my eventual revelation. That evening, I called Jennifer Walsh with a specific request. "I want to attend the Caldwell pre-wedding brunch as an observer," I told her. "Not as a guest, but as the club owner conducting a routine inspection of our catering services." "That's certainly within your rights," Jennifer replied carefully, "though it might create some awkward situations if you're recognized." "I'm counting on it," I said. The week leading up to the brunch, I made final preparations for what would be my first direct confrontation with the Caldwell family, since learning about my exclusion. I had my hair professionally styled, chose an elegant navy suit that projected authority without being ostentatious, and practiced the gracious but firm demeanor I would need to maintain my composure during what promised to be a difficult encounter. Sunday morning, I arrived at the Grandview an hour before the brunch was scheduled to begin. The staff was bustling with final preparations, arranging flowers on each table and setting up the mimosa station that would serve as the centerpiece of the morning's refreshments. "Mrs. Holloway," the catering manager greeted me with surprise. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." I like to personally observe our higher-profile events, I replied smoothly. The Caldwell family represents the kind of distinguished clientele we want to maintain relationships with. As the guests began arriving, I positioned myself in the adjoining sitting room where I could observe the gathering through the open French doors connecting the two spaces. I watched as Patricia Caldwell played hostess, greeting each arrival with air kisses and animated conversation about wedding preparations. Sophia looked radiant in a flowing pink dress that perfectly complemented the spring garden setting. She moved through the room with the confident grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, accepting congratulations and sharing details about honeymoon plans with obvious pleasure. And then Marcus arrived, looking handsome in a casual blazer and khakis, his face lit up with the kind of genuine happiness I hadn't seen in months. For a moment, watching him laugh with his college friends and embrace Sophia's grandmother, I almost forgot my hurt and anger. This was my son on one of the happiest days of his life, surrounded by people who cared about him and celebrating his future. But that moment of maternal pride was quickly replaced by renewed pain as I watched him navigate the room, playing the role of the perfect son-in-law-to-be. He complimented Patricia's dress, shared a hearty laugh with Sophia's father about golf handicaps, and charmed the elderly grandmother with stories about his work at the financial firm. There was no awkward gap in the conversation where someone might ask about his mother. No pause in the festivities where my absence felt noticeable. It was as if I had never existed, as if his success had materialized without any maternal sacrifice or support. The most painful moment came when Patricia Caldwell stood to offer a toast, her crystal mimosa glass catching the morning sunlight streaming through the garden room windows. "To Marcus and Sophia," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Two remarkable young people who represent the very best of their generation. Marcus, we couldn't be more thrilled to welcome you into our family. Your character, your ambition, and your values align perfectly with everything we hold dear." The assembled guests raised their glasses with murmurs of agreement and approval. Patricia continued, her gaze fixed adoringly on her future son-in-law. "We're particularly impressed by how you've risen above your humble beginnings to become the man you are today. It takes extraordinary determination to transform yourself so completely, to embrace refinement and sophistication despite coming from such different circumstances." My hands clenched involuntarily at her words. She was praising Marcus for abandoning his background, for successfully distancing himself from the working-class roots that had apparently required such effort to overcome. "Your mother," Patricia added with what seemed like genuine warmth, "must be so proud of how far you've come. It's a testament to her simple values that she raised a son with the intelligence to appreciate finer things." Simple values. The phrase was delivered as a compliment, but it carried the unmistakable subtext that my influence on Marcus had been fundamentally limited, valuable only insofar as it had prepared him to eventually outgrow his origins. Marcus accepted the toast graciously, thanking Patricia for her kind words and expressing his gratitude for being welcomed into such a distinguished family. He spoke about his excitement for the future, his appreciation for the opportunities that lay ahead, and his commitment to being worthy of the trust they had placed in him. Not once did he mention me directly. Not once did he acknowledge that his transformation from working-class background to social acceptability had been built on decades of maternal sacrifice and support. As the brunch continued, I retreated further into the sitting room, no longer able to watch the celebration of my son's success that required my complete erasure from his narrative. The catering staff occasionally glanced in my direction, clearly puzzled by my presence, but too professional to question the club owner's decision to observe their service. When the event finally concluded and the guests began departing, I remained, hidden in the sitting room, listening to the sounds of cleanup and conversation gradually fading. Through the window, I could see Marcus and Sophia posing for photographs in the rose garden, surrounded by both families united in celebration of their upcoming union. Patricia Caldwell's words echoed in my mind as I finally made my way to the parking lot. Simple values, humble beginnings, the intelligence to appreciate finer things. Each phrase was a carefully wrapped insult, praising Marcus for his ability to transcend the supposedly limited world I had provided for him. As I drove home that afternoon, I realized that my plan for a gentle revelation of my changed circumstances was no longer sufficient. The Caldwell family's casual dismissal of my worth, their comfortable assumption that I was too simple to understand their sophisticated world, required a more dramatic response. They wanted to see the clear distinction between their refined society and my working-class background. Soon, they would learn that those distinctions were far more fragile than they imagined, and that the woman they deemed unworthy of their company now held the power to grant or deny their most cherished social aspirations. The wedding was just 5 days away, and it was time for the Caldwell family to discover exactly who they had chosen to exclude from their perfect celebration. Thursday morning, 3 days before the wedding, my phone rang at precisely 8 o'clock. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, but when I answered, it was Sophia's voice that greeted me with barely concealed panic. "Mrs. Holloway? This is Sophia Caldwell. I'm sorry to call so early, but we have an emergency situation with the wedding, and Marcus thought you might be able to help." An emergency. How interesting that they would turn to the simple cafeteria worker only when they needed something. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "It's the venue," Sophia said, her usual composure cracking audibly. "The Grandview Country Club is threatening to cancel our reception. Something about policy violations and character references. We don't understand what's happening. Everything was confirmed months ago." I had to suppress a smile. My new policies were working exactly as intended. "That does sound concerning," I replied with practiced sympathy. "What exactly are they telling you?" "They're saying that all events with more than 100 guests now require additional documentation and approval from the ownership group." "But Mrs. Holloway, the wedding is in 3 days. We have 250 people coming, the caterers are preparing, the flowers are ordered. Everything is already paid for." The desperation in her voice was palpable. For the first time since I'd known her, Sophia Caldwell sounded like what she actually was, a young woman in over her head, facing the potential collapse of the social event she'd spent months orchestrating. "Have you spoken to anyone in management?" I asked. "Surely there's been some misunderstanding." "My father tried calling yesterday, but they won't discuss details over the phone. They've requested an in-person meeting this afternoon with all parties involved in the event booking. My mother is beside herself. She's already called everyone she knows trying to find an alternative venue, but everything comparable is booked solid." Of course it was. Venues like the Grandview didn't become available with 3 days' notice. The Caldwell family was discovering that their carefully constructed social triumph was far more fragile than they'd assumed. "I'm so sorry this is happening," I said, injecting genuine warmth into my voice. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Actually, yes. Marcus mentioned that you have some connection to the club, that you've been helping with event coordination, or something? We were hoping you might be willing to come to the meeting this afternoon. Maybe you could help explain to them what kind of family we are, that this is all just a terrible misunderstanding." The irony was exquisite. They wanted me to vouch for their character, to use whatever small influence they imagined I possessed, to save the wedding they deemed me too embarrassing to attend. "Of course," I replied without hesitation. "What time is the meeting?" 2 o'clock in the club's administrative offices. "Mrs. Holloway, I can't tell you how grateful we are. Marcus always said you were wonderful, and I'm sorry we haven't had more opportunities to get to know each other better." After hanging up, I spent the morning preparing for what would be the most crucial performance of my life. I chose my most conservative business suit, styled my silver hair into an elegant chignon, and selected jewelry that was tasteful but clearly expensive. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not the simple cafeteria worker the Caldwells expected, but a woman of substance and authority. I arrived at the Grandview 15 minutes early, checking in with the administrative staff I'd come to know well over the past few months. The conference room had been prepared with water glasses and notepads, the kind of formal setup that suggested serious business would be conducted. The Caldwell family arrived precisely on time, with Patricia leading the procession in what was clearly her most intimidating power outfit. She was followed by Sophia's father, Robert, a distinguished man in his 60s who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems through influence and connections. Marcus and Sophia brought up the rear, both looking significantly more subdued than I'd seen them in months. "Mrs. Holloway," Patricia greeted me with obvious relief. "Thank goodness you're here. This whole situation is so bizarre. We can't imagine what's caused this sudden change in policy." I offered her a sympathetic smile. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding that can be resolved quickly." The club's general manager, David Harrison, entered the room carrying a thick folder of documents. I'd worked closely with David over the past few months, and he understood exactly what was about to unfold, though his professional demeanor gave nothing away. "Thank you all for coming," David began, taking his seat at the head of the conference table. "As you know, we've recently implemented new policies regarding large events, particularly those involving significant social and professional networking components." Robert Caldwell leaned forward aggressively. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, these policies weren't in place when we booked this venue. We have a signed contract and have made substantial financial commitments based on your previous assurances." "I understand your concern," David replied calmly. "However, our new ownership has determined that the Grandview's reputation requires more stringent oversight of the events we host. We need to ensure that all celebrations held here reflect the values and standards our members expect." "What exactly are you implying?" Patricia demanded, her voice rising slightly. "The Caldwell family has been part of this community for generations. Our reputation is impeccable." David consulted his folder. "The concern isn't about your family's standing, Mrs. Caldwell. It's about the broader guest list and the character of the celebration itself. Our new policies require that all event hosts demonstrate a commitment to family values, genuine relationships, and authentic celebration rather than merely social positioning." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Sophia's face had gone pale, and Marcus was staring at the table with obvious confusion. "I don't understand," Sophia said quietly. "What do you mean by authentic celebration?" David's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see him choosing his words carefully. "We've noticed that some recent events have prioritized networking opportunities and social advancement over genuine personal connections. The new ownership is particularly concerned about celebrations that exclude family members for superficial reasons." Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes widening as understanding began to dawn. "Family members?" "Yes," David continued. "We've become aware that certain individuals have been excluded from this celebration not due to space constraints or family disputes, but because they were deemed socially inadequate or potentially embarrassing to the hosts." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Caldwell's face had flushed red, while Robert looked as though he was calculating the potential legal ramifications of this conversation. Sophia was staring at Marcus with obvious confusion, and Marcus himself appeared to be rapidly connecting dots he'd never wanted to see aligned. "Who told you this?" Robert demanded. "These are private family decisions, and I resent the implication that we're being judged for our guest list choices." "The source of our information isn't relevant," David replied smoothly. "What matters is that the Grandview Country Club will no longer host events that compromise our commitment to family values and authentic relationships." I had remained silent throughout this exchange, watching as the carefully constructed facade of the Caldwell family's perfect wedding began to crumble. But now, as Marcus turned to look at me with dawning recognition, I knew the moment had arrived. For my own revelation. Perhaps, I said quietly, I should explain my actual connection to the Grandview Country Club. Every eye in the room turned to me. Patricia's expression showed polite confusion, while Sophia looked merely puzzled. But Marcus's face had gone completely white, as if he was beginning to understand that the simple woman he'd dismissed might not be quite as powerless as he'd assumed. Mrs. Holloway? David prompted, though he knew exactly what I was about to reveal. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt and meeting each of their gazes in turn, before settling on my son's stricken face. I'm not just someone with connections to the club, I said, my voice calm and clear. I'm the new owner of the Grandview Country Club. I purchased it 6 months ago, and I've been observing your wedding preparations with great interest. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Patricia gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. Robert's mouth fell open in shock. Sophia made a small, strangled sound of disbelief, but it was Marcus's reaction that mattered most to me. He stared at me with a mixture of shock, recognition, and what looked like the beginning of genuine shame. You own this place? He whispered. Yes, I replied simply. The same place where you're planning to celebrate your wedding. The same wedding you decided I was too embarrassing to attend. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Patricia Caldwell found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a strangled whisper. You own the Grandview? I nodded calmly, remaining standing while they all stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to dawning horror. I purchased it through a holding company last December. The previous owners were facing financial difficulties, and I saw an opportunity to invest in something meaningful. Robert Caldwell's businessman instincts kicked in first, his mind clearly racing to recalculate everything he thought he knew about this situation. That's a $40 million property. How could a cafeteria worker possibly afford such an investment? I finished for him. That's an excellent question, Robert. Perhaps you'd like to know about my other recent acquisition. I reached into my purse and withdrew a simple piece of paper, a copy of my lottery ticket, validation form. I placed it on the conference table where everyone could see the official lottery commission seal and the amount $87 million after taxes. I won the state lottery 8 months ago, I explained matter-of-factly. $87 million. Quite a change from my cafeteria worker salary, wouldn't you say? Sophia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Marcus had gone, beyond pale to an ashen gray that made me worry he might actually faint. This is impossible, Patricia breathed, staring at the document as if it might disappear if she looked away. I assure you, it's quite real, I replied. I can provide additional documentation if you'd like verification. Bank statements, investment portfolios, the deed to this property. Whatever you need to convince yourselves that the simple woman you deemed unworthy of your company is now worth more than most of your social circle combined. David Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps this would be a good time for me to explain the current situation regarding your event booking. All eyes turned to him, though I could see that Patricia and Robert were still processing the magnitude of what I'd just revealed. As the new owner, Mrs. Holloway has implemented policies requiring her personal approval for all major events, David continued. She's reviewed your wedding plans extensively, including the guest list, and has some concerns about whether this celebration aligns with the club's values. What kind of concerns? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. I resumed my seat, crossing my legs and regarding my son with the kind of measured attention I might give to a business proposal under review. Well, let's start with the fact that you've planned a family celebration that deliberately excludes your only living parent, I said calmly. Not due to space constraints, not because of a family dispute, but because you and your future in-laws decided I wasn't sophisticated enough to fit your aesthetic vision. Sophia found her voice, though it shook noticeably. Mrs. Holloway, if we had known about your circumstances, obviously things would have been different. Would they? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Because it seems to me that your objections weren't actually about my financial status. They were about my background, my education, level, my profession, the fact that I worked in a cafeteria rather than sitting on charity boards. I turned to Patricia, who was still staring at the lottery documentation. You praised Marcus just last Sunday for rising above his humble beginnings, for having the intelligence to appreciate finer things, despite coming from such different circumstances. Were you really only concerned about my bank account, Patricia? Or were you embarrassed by what I represented about your future son-in-law's origins? Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Mrs. Holloway, Beatrice, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about our intentions. Oh, I don't think there were any misunderstandings at all, I replied smoothly. I think your intentions were crystal clear. You wanted a wedding that would showcase your family's social status and advance Marcus's career prospects. Including his working-class mother would have undermined the narrative you were trying to create. Robert leaned forward, his businessman's instincts finally overriding his shock. Look, Mrs. Holloway, if there have been any slights or oversights, I'm sure we can address them. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot, but now that we understand the situation— Now that you understand I have money, you mean, I interrupted. Now that you realize the woman you dismissed might actually be useful to you. Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracking with emotion. Mom, I had no idea about the lottery. Why? Didn't you tell me? I studied my son's face, seeing genuine anguish mixed with confusion, and what might have been the beginning of shame. I was planning to tell you, Marcus. I was waiting for the right moment, perhaps after the wedding. I thought we could celebrate together, maybe take that trip to Europe I'd always dreamed of but never been able to afford. My voice softened slightly as I continued. But then you made it clear that you were ashamed of me, that I was an embarrassment to your new life. So I decided to wait and see exactly how far you were willing to go in denying the woman who raised you. Tears were flowing down Sophia's cheeks now. We didn't know, she whispered. We never meant to hurt you. Didn't you? I asked gently. Because from where I sat, it seemed like hurting me was a small price to pay for the perfect wedding photos and the right social connections. I stood again, walking to the large window that overlooked the country club's manicured grounds. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 6 months, while you've all been planning your celebration? I've been learning about your world, dining in these restaurants, attending charity galas, meeting the people whose approval you value so highly. I turned back to face them. And do you know what I discovered? They're not particularly impressive. Oh, they have money and connections, but so do I now. The difference is that I remember where I came from, and I don't consider my past something to be ashamed of or overcome. David Harrison consulted his notes. Mrs. Holloway, regarding the wedding booking, what would you like me to tell the catering staff and vendors about Saturday's event? The moment of truth had arrived. I could cancel their wedding entirely, leaving them scrambling to find an alternative venue with 2 days' notice. I could demand that they publicly apologize and grovel for my forgiveness. I could use my newfound power to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. But as I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, I saw not just the man who had dismissed me, but the boy I had raised, the child who had helped me fold napkins and arrange flowers, who had been proud to call me his mother until the world convinced him otherwise. I'm not going to cancel your wedding, I said finally, watching relief flood their faces. But I am going to make some changes to the arrangements. The relief was immediately replaced by apprehension. What kind of changes? Robert asked warily. Return to my seat, pulling out a notepad where I'd written my terms during the long sleepless nights since discovering their betrayal. First, I will be attending the wedding as the mother of the groom, with all the honors and recognition that position traditionally entails. I'll be escorted down the aisle, seated in the front row, included in all family photographs, and acknowledged in any speeches or toasts. Patricia started to speak, but I held up a hand. Second, the wedding toast will include a recognition of my role in Marcus's success, acknowledging that his achievements were built on the foundation of love and sacrifice, provided by his working-class mother. I could see Marcus flinch at my words, but I continued. Third, you'll make a significant donation to the scholarship fund at Maplewood Elementary School, where I worked for 43 years, in honor of all the cafeteria workers, janitors, teachers, and support staff who help shape children's lives despite being deemed socially invisible. How much of a donation? Robert asked, his voice tight. $50,000, I replied. Enough to fund full college scholarships for several deserving students whose parents work in jobs you consider beneath your notice. The room was silent except for the sound of Sophia's quiet crying. And finally, I said, looking directly at Marcus, you'll spend the remainder of your engagement period thinking seriously about what kind of man you want to be. The son I raised who understood that character matters more than connections, or the social climber who's willing to sacrifice family for professional advancement. Marcus met my gaze, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the boy I remembered. You don't have to decide right now, I continued, but you should know that your answer will determine not just whether this wedding happens, but whether we have any relationship going forward. The conference room remained frozen in stunned silence as my ultimatum settled over the Caldwell family, like a suffocating blanket. Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, while Robert stared at me with the kind of calculating expression I imagined he used during hostile business negotiations. But it was Marcus who captured my attention, his face cycling through emotions I hadn't seen since he was a teenager grappling with difficult decisions. I need some air, Marcus said suddenly, pushing back from the table so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. He strode from the room without looking at anyone, leaving Sophia to stare after him with obvious confusion and growing panic. David Harrison diplomatically excused himself to handle other club business, leaving me alone with the Caldwell family in what had become an increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere. Patricia was the first to attempt damage control, her society training kicking in despite the extraordinary circumstances. Beatrice, she began, her voice carefully modulated. I want you to know that if we've given you the wrong impression about our feelings toward you, we deeply regret that. Family is incredibly important to us, and we would never intentionally exclude someone who matters to Marcus. The practiced politician's response was almost impressive in its complete avoidance of accountability. Patricia, I replied evenly, you literally told me 3 days ago that I should take a background role because I didn't fit your wedding's aesthetic. There's no wrong impression here. There's just the uncomfortable reality of what you actually think of me. Robert cleared his throat, attempting to take charge of the situation. Mrs. Holloway, I think we're all operating under some heightened emotions here. Perhaps we could schedule another meeting tomorrow, give everyone time to process this new information, and approach things with clearer heads. What's to process? I asked. The fact that you've spent months treating me like an embarrassment, or the fact that I now have the financial resources to match your social pretensions? Sophia spoke up, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. Mrs. Holloway, I know how this must look from your perspective, but Marcus loves you so much. He talks about you all the time, about how hard you worked to give him opportunities, about how proud he is of what you accomplished. Does he? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. Because in the past year, I felt like someone he was trying to manage rather than someone he was proud to claim as family. It's not that simple, Sophia continued, desperation creeping into her tone. When you enter certain social circles, there are expectations, unspoken rules about how things work. It's not about being ashamed. It's about navigating complex social dynamics. I leaned back in my chair, studying this young woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law. Sophia, let me ask you something. Do you love my son? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course I do. Why would you ask that? Because if you truly love him, then you should want to know and appreciate all the parts of his story that made him who he is. Instead, you've been helping him edit out the chapters that don't fit your preferred narrative. Patricia interjected, her voice carrying a note of steel beneath the diplomatic veneer. Mrs. Holloway, I understand you're hurt, but you're being unfair. We're not trying to edit Marcus's story. We're trying to help him build the best possible future. By denying his past? By not letting his past limit his potential, Robert said firmly. Marcus has worked incredibly hard to position himself for success. Why should he be held back by circumstances he had no control over? The question revealed everything I needed to know about their fundamental values. To them, my 43 years of hard work and sacrifice weren't a foundation to be honored. They were obstacles to be overcome. Mr. Caldwell, I said quietly, I'm not holding Marcus back. I'm the reason he was able to move forward in the first place. But apparently, acknowledging that fact is inconvenient for the image you're trying to create. Before anyone could respond, Marcus returned to the room, his face flushed from whatever internal battle he'd been fighting in the hallway. He took his seat but didn't look at anyone directly. I've been thinking about what you said, Mom, he began, his voice hoarse. About what kind of man I want to be. The room held its breath. And I keep coming back to this question. When did I become someone who could look at the woman who raised me and decide she wasn't good enough to be seen with me? Sophia reached for his hand, but he pulled back slightly. Marcus, don't do this. Don't let guilt make you say things you don't mean. I'm not speaking from guilt, Marcus replied, finally meeting my eyes. I'm speaking from shame. Deep, horrible shame about choices I've made and values I've abandoned. Patricia's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Marcus, you're being dramatic. These are normal adjustments that happen when people move between different social environments? Are they? Marcus asked, turning to face his future mother-in-law. Is it normal to exclude your mother from your wedding because she might embarrass you in front of influential people? Is it normal to be more concerned about networking opportunities than family relationships? The confrontation I'd been hoping for was finally happening, but watching Marcus's anguish was more painful than I'd anticipated. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It was the painful awakening of a young man who was discovering that he'd lost himself somewhere along the path to success. Marcus, Sophia said, her voice rising with panic. Our wedding is in 2 days. We can't completely change everything now because you're having second thoughts about guest list decisions we made months ago. Can't we? Marcus asked. Why not? What's so set in stone that it can't be changed to do the right thing? Robert stood abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. Because there are 250 people expecting a certain type of celebration. Because there are professional relationships and business connections that depend on this event proceeding as planned. Because sometimes being an adult means honoring commitments even when they become inconvenient. Inconvenient, Marcus repeated, slowly. Is that what you call treating my mother like an embarrassment? Inconvenient? I watched this family implode with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sorrow. Part of me was gratified to see Marcus finally standing up for what was right, but I could also see the pain this revelation was causing everyone involved. Perhaps, I interjected quietly, this conversation would be more productive if we focused on solutions rather than recriminations. All eyes turned to me, hope flickering in some faces while others showed wariness about what I might propose next. Marcus, I continued, I gave you my conditions for allowing this wedding to proceed at my venue. But I want you to understand that those conditions aren't about forcing you to choose between me and Sophia's family. They're about ensuring that any celebration of your marriage is built on honest foundations. I stood and walked to the window again, gathering my thoughts. I don't want to be included in your wedding out of obligation or guilt. I want to be included because you genuinely believe that the woman who raised you deserves to witness one of the most important moments of your life. When I turned back to face them, I could see that my words had hit their mark. Sophia was crying openly now, and even Patricia looked shaken. The question isn't whether you can afford to include me, I said. The question is whether you can afford not to. Because the kind of marriage that begins with denying family, that prioritizes image over authenticity, that treats love as secondary to social advancement, that's not a foundation that will support you through the challenges that life will inevitably bring. Marcus stood slowly, his decision evident in his posture before he spoke a word. You're right, Mom, he said, his voice clear and strong for the first time all afternoon. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry it took me this long to remember who I'm supposed to be. He turned to Sophia, his expression gentle but resolute. I love you, Sophia, but I won't start our marriage by dishonoring the woman who made it possible for me to become someone worthy of your love in the first place. The revelation was complete, but the real test of character was just beginning. Sophia's face crumpled at Marcus's words, tears streaming down her cheeks as the full weight of his declaration settled over the room. For a moment, she looked like the young woman she truly was beneath all the sophisticated polish, vulnerable, confused, and genuinely heartbroken. What are you saying, Marcus? She whispered. Are you calling off our wedding because of this? Marcus moved toward her, his expression filled with pain, but also a clarity I hadn't seen in him for months. I'm not calling off our wedding, Sophia. I'm trying to save it by making sure it starts with honesty instead of shame. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his despite her attempt to pull away. I love you, and I want to marry you, but I won't do it by pretending to be someone I'm not, or by treating the most important person in my life like an embarrassment. Patricia had been watching this exchange with growing alarm, and now she stood abruptly, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. This is ridiculous, she exclaimed, her voice shrill with frustration. Marcus, you're throwing away everything we've worked for because of some misguided guilt about hurt feelings. This wedding represents opportunities that won't come again. Connections that could define your entire career trajectory. Mother, please, Sophia said weakly, but Patricia was beyond listening to diplomatic restraint. No, Sophia, this has gone far enough. Mrs. Holloway, she turned to me with barely concealed fury. You've made your point. You have money now. You own this club. You can demand to be included in the wedding. Fine. We accept your conditions. But don't destroy these young people's future because you need to prove something about your worth. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robert stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his wife's arm, but the damage was already done. Patricia, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. I'm not the one who's been destroying anything. I'm not the one who decided that social climbing was more important than family loyalty. And I'm certainly not the one who taught my child that success means abandoning the people who helped make it possible. I stood slowly, my decision crystallizing, with each word I spoke. You know what? You're absolutely right about one thing. This has gone far enough. The room went silent, everyone sensing that a crucial moment had arrived. Marcus, I said, turning to my son who was still kneeling beside Sophia's chair. I'm withdrawing my conditions for the wedding. Hope flickered across Patricia's face, but I wasn't finished. I'm withdrawing them because I've realized something important. I don't want to be included in a celebration where I have to force my way in. I don't want to attend a wedding where my presence is tolerated rather than celebrated. And I don't want to begin a relationship with my future daughter-in-law by using financial leverage to compel respect that should be freely given. Marcus's face went white. Mom, What are you saying? I'm saying that the Grandview Country Club is available for your wedding, no conditions attached. You can proceed exactly as you originally planned, with your carefully curated guest list, your perfect aesthetic, and your strategic networking opportunities. Sophia looked confused, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. But you said you wanted to be included. I said a lot of things, I replied. But I've been thinking about them, and I realized that forcing my way into your celebration wouldn't actually give me what I really want. I walked to the conference table and began gathering my papers. What I want is a son who's proud to call me his mother, not one who includes me because he's been backed into a corner. What I want is a family relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not one based on financial obligations. Marcus stood slowly, his face a mask of confusion and growing panic. Mom, please don't do this. I want you at my wedding. I want to do the right thing. Do you? I asked gently. Or do you want to avoid feeling guilty about doing the wrong thing? The bye. Question hit its mark. Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't deny the accuracy of my observation. I need you to understand something, Marcus, I continued, my voice softening with genuine love despite the pain of the moment. For the past 6 months, ever since I won that lottery, I've been fantasizing about this moment, about revealing my wealth and watching all of you scramble to recalculate your treatment of me. I paused, looking around the room at their stricken faces. But now that it's happening, I realize that getting respect because of my bank account isn't really getting respect at all. It's just getting fear and opportunism dressed up as politeness. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Holloway, I think you may be misinterpreting our reaction. We're genuinely sorry if we've made you feel unwelcome. Are you sorry? About your behavior, Robert? Or are you sorry that your behavior has consequences now that you know I have money? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I turned back to Marcus, who looked like he was watching his world collapse in real time. I love you, son. I love you enough to let you make this choice freely, without coercion or ultimatums. If you want a wedding that excludes your mother because it serves your professional and social ambitions, then have that wedding. Live with that choice and see how it feels over time. But if I don't invite you, Marcus said desperately, what happens to us? What happens to our relationship? The question I'd been dreading hung between us, heavy with implications that would shape the rest of our lives. I don't know, I answered honestly. I suppose that depends on whether you can live with the man you become when you choose status over family. Sophia had stopped crying and was watching our exchange with growing understanding. Mrs. Holloway, she said quietly, what if we wanted to change things? Not because we have to, but because we want to. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine transformation rather than damage control. What would you want to change, Sophia? She glanced at Marcus, then back at me. Everything, she whispered. The guest list, the priorities, the whole approach. What if we wanted to plan a wedding that actually honored the people we love instead of the people we're trying to impress? Patricia gasped audibly. Sophia, you can't be serious. Do you have any idea what this would mean for your father's business relationships? For Marcus's career prospects? Maybe, Sophia said, her voice growing stronger. Those relationships aren't worth having if they require us to dishonor our families. Marcus was staring at his fiancée as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Do you mean that? Are you willing to walk away from everything your parents have planned? I'm willing to walk away from everything that's not real, Sophia replied. I'm tired of performing respectability instead of actually living it. The transformation happening before my eyes was remarkable, but I'd been disappointed too many times to trust it completely. Words are easy, I said carefully. Actions are what matter. If you're serious about changing course, then prove it. Not to me, but to yourselves. I gathered my belongings and moved toward the door. The wedding is in 2 days. You have that long to decide who you want to be when you stand at that altar. Performers playing roles for an audience, or authentic people celebrating genuine love. As I reached the door, Marcus called out desperately, "Mom, wait. What should we do? How do we fix this?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob. You don't fix it, Marcus. You choose it. Either you choose to be the man I raised you to be, or you choose to be the man Patricia's world wants you to become. But you can't be both. And you can't blame anyone else for whichever choice you make. I left them sitting in that conference room, facing the wreckage of their carefully constructed plans and the opportunity to build something better from the ruins. Whether they would seize that opportunity or retreat into familiar patterns of social ambition remained to be seen. The next 24 hours would reveal everything about who my son truly was, and whether the relationship we'd shared for 28 years had been strong enough to survive his journey into the world of wealth and status. For the first time since this ordeal began, the choice was entirely his to make. The call came at 6:30 Friday morning, less than 24 hours before the scheduled wedding. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee and trying to distract myself with the morning newspaper, when Marcus's name appeared on my phone screen. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept all night. "I'm here," I said, simply setting down my coffee cup and bracing myself for whatever he was about to tell me. "We need to talk, all of us. Can you come to the club this morning? Say, 10 o'clock? "Of course," I replied, though my heart was racing with uncertainty about what this meeting might bring. When I arrived at the Grand View, I found Marcus waiting for me in the lobby, looking haggard but somehow more like himself than he had in months. He was wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, rather than his usual carefully pressed business attire, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Thank you for coming," he said, embracing me with a warmth I hadn't felt from him in over a year. "Sophia's already here, and her parents are on their way." He led me to the same conference room where yesterday's confrontation had taken place, but the atmosphere was completely different. Sophia sat at the table, also casually dressed, with red-rimmed eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent in tears and soul-searching. When she saw me, she stood immediately. "Mrs. Holloway," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I owe you an enormous apology. Not because you have money, not because you own this club, but because I lost sight of what really matters when planning what should have been the most meaningful day of my life." I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine transformation rather than calculated damage control. What I saw was a young woman who appeared to have undergone a fundamental shift in perspective. "Thank you, Sophia," I said carefully. "That means a great deal to me." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, Sophia and I spent all night talking about what kind of life we want to build together, about what kind of people we want to be, and we realized that we've been planning a wedding that had almost nothing to do with love and everything to do with image." Before I could respond, Patricia and Robert Caldwell arrived, both looking significantly less polished than I'd ever seen. Them. Patricia's usually immaculate hair was slightly disheveled, and Robert's tie was askew, as if they'd rushed to get here. "Mrs. Holloway," Patricia said immediately upon entering. "Before anyone says anything else, I need to apologize to you directly. My behavior has been inexcusable. I let social considerations override basic human decency, and I'm deeply ashamed of that." The apology seemed genuine, though I could see the struggle it represented for a woman who was clearly unused to admitting fault. "I appreciate that, Patricia," I replied. "Thank you for saying so." Marcus stood, moving to the head of the table where he could address everyone at once. "We've made a decision about tomorrow," he announced. "We're canceling the wedding as it was planned." My heart sank, despite everything that had happened. Whatever my feelings about their treatment of me, I didn't want to be responsible for destroying their happiness. But, Marcus continued, we're not canceling our marriage. We're changing it into something that actually reflects our values instead of our ambitions. Sophia joined him, taking his hand. We've decided to have a small ceremony tomorrow with just immediate family and a few close friends, people who matter to us as human beings, not as networking opportunities. The guest list, Marcus said, looking directly at me, will include my mother in the place of honor she's always deserved. Not because she owns this venue, not because she's wealthy, but because she's the most important person in my life, and I've been an idiot for forgetting that. Patricia winced visibly at his words, but didn't protest. What about all the people who are expecting to attend? Robert asked practically. The business associates? The extended family members? We're sending them a letter explaining that we've decided to have a more intimate celebration, Sophia replied. We'll host a casual reception party next month for everyone else, but tomorrow will be about family and love, not networking and appearances. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, but I needed to be certain this transformation was real. And what prompted this change of heart? I asked. Yesterday you were willing to exclude me entirely rather than compromise your social objectives. Marcus sat down heavily, his expression filled with the kind of self-awareness that comes from painful, honest reflection. Because Sophia asked me a question last night that I couldn't answer. What question? Sophia spoke up, her voice clear and strong. I asked him if he could imagine standing at that altar, surrounded by 250 people who cared, more about being seen than about celebrating our love, and feeling genuinely happy knowing his mother was sitting at home because we'd decided she wasn't good enough to witness our marriage. And? I prompted. And I realized that no amount of career advancement or social status would ever be worth carrying that shame for the rest of my life, Marcus replied. I realized that the man who could exclude his mother from his wedding wasn't someone I wanted to be, and probably wasn't someone worth marrying either. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We've all learned something important about what really matters, she said quietly. And Marcus, both your mother and Sophia deserve better than what we were offering. Robert nodded reluctantly. The business connections will survive. The relationships that matter are the ones built on mutual respect, not social obligation. I looked around the table at these people who had spent months dismissing me as inadequate, now acknowledging not just my worth, but the poverty of their own values. The transformation seemed genuine, but time would tell whether it would last beyond the immediate crisis. So what happens now? I asked. Marcus smiled, the first truly joyful expression I'd seen from him in over a year. Now we plan a real wedding. Small, meaningful, focused on the people we love rather than the people we want to impress. And Mom, he reached across the table to take my hand. I want you to walk me down the aisle. Not because you're all I have left, but because you're the person who made me who I am. And I want everyone to see how proud I am to be your son. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Are you sure about this? All of it? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Marcus replied. I lost myself somewhere along the way, but you helped me find my way back. Not through ultimatums or conditions, but by showing me what real dignity looks like. As we left the club that morning to begin planning a completely different kind of celebration, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. My lottery winnings had given me the power to force my inclusion in their lives, but ultimately it was my willingness to let them choose freely that had created the space for genuine change. The wedding that took place the next day was nothing like the elaborate social spectacle originally planned. 28 guests gathered in the club's garden room, surrounded by simple flower arrangements and focused entirely on witnessing Marcus and Sophia's commitment to each other and to the values they had rediscovered. I walked my son down the aisle wearing a dress I'd chosen for comfort rather than impression, And when he introduced me to the small gathering as the most remarkable woman I know, I knew that our relationship had not just survived this crisis. It had emerged stronger and more authentic than ever before. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from wielding power, but from having the wisdom to know when not to use it. Sometimes love means letting people find their own way back to what matters, even when you have the means to force them onto the right path. My son had said I was too old for his wedding, never knowing I owned the venue. But in the end, age brought wisdom, wealth brought options, and love brought forgiveness. A combination that transformed a potential tragedy into a genuine celebration of family, authenticity, and the values that truly matter. The lottery had changed my financial circumstances, but watching my son choose love over status, substance over appearance, had given me something far more valuable than money. The knowledge that the man I'd raised was still there, beneath all the social climbing and professional ambition, waiting for the right moment to remember who he really was. And that was worth more than $87 million could ever buy. 3 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything we had learned about authenticity and family values. "Mrs. Holloway?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "This is Victoria Sterling from Sterling & Associates Public Relations. I represent several high-profile clients, and I have a proposition that might interest you." I was sitting in my home office, reviewing the quarterly reports from the Grandview Country Club, which had seen a remarkable upturn in bookings since word had spread about our new emphasis on meaningful celebrations over superficial spectacle. "What kind of proposition?" I asked, though something in her tone already put me on guard. "We've heard about your remarkable story. The lottery win, the country club purchase, the wedding situation with your son. It's exactly the kind of narrative that television producers and publishers are looking for right now. Inspirational stories about family, redemption, the triumph of authentic values over social pretension." I set down my pen, giving her my full attention. "Go on. I'd like to represent you in developing this story for multiple media platforms. We're talking about a potential book deal, a television movie, perhaps even a reality show following your new life as a lottery winner navigating high society. The financial opportunities could be substantial, easily in the 7-figure range." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was someone wanting to turn our family's painful journey into entertainment, to profit from the very authenticity we'd fought so hard to reclaim. "And what would this involve?" I asked. "Well, we'd need to recreate some key moments for dramatic effect. The initial confrontation at the country club, the wedding day transformation, we'd want to capture all of that with proper production values. Of course, we'd need cooperation from your son and his wife, and the Caldwell family would be important participants as well." "Recreate moments," I repeated slowly. "You mean stage them?" "Exactly. We'd work with skilled writers to ensure the emotional beats are properly highlighted, maybe enhance some of the conflicts for better dramatic impact. The core story is wonderful, but television audiences need a certain level of intensity to stay engaged." I thought about Marcus and Sophia, who had spent the past 3 months rebuilding their relationship on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. I thought about Patricia and Robert, who had been making genuine efforts to move beyond their previous superficiality. I thought about the quiet Sunday dinners we'd been sharing, the slowly healing conversations, the tentative but growing trust. "Ms. Sterling," I said finally, "thank you for thinking of me, but I'm not interested." There was a pause. "Mrs. Holloway, I don't think you understand the scope of what I'm offering. This could make you one of the most recognizable people in America. The financial returns alone would be extraordinary." "I'm sure they would be," I replied. "But you see, I've recently learned something important about the difference between being valued for who you are and being valued for what you can provide to other people's agendas. I'm not sure I follow. I spent 43 years being invisible. To the kind of people who now want to celebrate my story. They didn't care about the cafeteria worker who sacrificed everything for her son's education. But they're very interested in the lottery winner who owns a country club and had a dramatic confrontation with social climbers. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd been experimenting with growing vegetables. A humble pursuit that brought me more satisfaction than any amount of media attention could provide. The story you want to tell isn't really about family values or authentic relationships, I continued. It's about the spectacle of wealth and conflict. You want to turn our painful but ultimately healing experience into entertainment for people who will forget about it as soon as the next dramatic story comes along. Mrs. Holloway, with respect, you're missing an incredible opportunity to inspire people. Your story could help other families facing similar challenges. Could it? Or would it just teach them that family problems make good television if you're willing to perform them for an audience? When I hung up the phone, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or recognition. 6 months ago, I might have been tempted by the offer, not for the money, which I no longer needed, but for the validation it represented. The chance to prove to the world that the dismissed cafeteria worker had become someone worthy of attention. But I'd learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be performed or staged or enhanced for dramatic effect. The quiet rebuilding of trust with Marcus. The genuine friendship that was slowly developing with Sophia. The weekly volunteer shifts I'd taken at the elementary school where I used to work. Helping serve lunch to children who reminded me daily of what really mattered. That evening, I called Marcus to tell him about the publicist's offer and my decision to decline it. "Really?" he said, and I could hear both relief and pride in his voice. "You turned down 7 figures to tell our story?" "I turned down 7 figures to exploit our story," I corrected. "There's a difference." "There is," he agreed. "And Mom, thank you for protecting what we've built together instead of cashing in on it." After we hung up, I realized that this phone call had been the final test of the values we'd all struggled to rediscover. In a world that constantly pressured people to monetize their experiences, to turn their most personal moments into public performances, choosing privacy and authenticity over profit and fame was perhaps the most radical act of all. I had won $87 million in the lottery, but the real jackpot had been learning that some things, dignity, family bonds, genuine relationships, were worth infinitely more than money. And unlike lottery winnings, those treasures grew in value the more carefully they were protected from the marketplace of public consumption. Some stories I had discovered were too precious to sell. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the D.I. mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.